very much, and thanks to Senator Franken himself, and we'll thank him momentarily, and to you and staff for driving the issue so forward. My job is to talk just real briefly, to tee up the issue for the panel is going to talk about forced arbitration, what it means, what the new data we have from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau indicates, and what people think about forced arbitration. I think the opening thing to say is there's probably no single greater stripping of consumer rights in modern times than the advent and widespread use of forced arbitration provisions and contracts throughout the economy. And so I think every major national consumer group, every state and local consumer group has addressing the problem of forced arbitration as a priority, because it has to do with our ability as consumers to remedy wrongs committed against us, individually and collectively, by large corporations. So let's just step back. Some of you guys are deep into this stuff, and some of you are not. What is forced arbitration, just as a first glance? The forced arbitration are provisions included in contracts that require consumers to use arbitration rather than seek remedies for wrongs in the traditional civil justice system, our regular courts. It's forced because they're included in contracts that are not up for negotiation. It's forced in that it's pre-dispute. You have to agree to enter arbitration before, in fact, you know there's a dispute. The only remedy, the only option consumers have to avoid this, basically, is to not enter into the contract at all. Most consumers don't spend their time reading the fine print of contracts. If they do, they find they don't, in many cases, have any options but to use these products or services that contain these requirements. So they don't have any real option, and they don't anticipate that they're ever going to use it at all. So it is effectively forced on consumers. Why do we have these provisions in consumer contracts? We have them really because clever lawyers figured out that it was a way to strip rights from consumers. And why not, if you are a provider of a service or a provider of a product, keep consumers out of the traditional court system and put them into an arbitration system if you can. Why would you be interested in doing that? Because consumers are denied the rights that they have in the traditional court system, the right to standard due process rights, the right to use discovery, and especially because most of these forced arbitration provisions deny consumers the right to band together to bring class actions. So they're unable to join together into particularly important and small dollar disputes, which are really pervasive in the economy. You only have the choice on your own to bring a $30 claim. You're just not going to bring it. If a million people together can bring a $30 claim that affects $30 each, they can. I can just tell you this from personal experience. We have Comcast as our cable provider for public citizen, and our service goes down all the time. And periodically I yell at someone and say, give me the contract. We got to figure out what we're going to do. Like, oh yeah, there's a forced arbitration provision. There's kind of nothing we could do. We could bring this case and maybe we've got $200 in damages, and that's just not practically worth it for us. So we put the contract away, and I get mad again when the service goes out, do the contract again, and we're stuck. And there really is no option, and there's not going to be an option so long as we're subjected to this kind of forced arbitration provision. So that's what it is, that's why we have it. Why does it matter? It's because of what I was just suggesting. Consumers really don't have any rights to remedy the wrongs that are committed in terms of all kinds of things. So it can be the unfair fees attached to some contract, some service you have. It can be the failure to provide service. It can be that a product is even defective. You're really just stuck as a consumer without any real remedy. That's why many of us view these provisions as an effective license to steal for corporations. Either they've got a legal right to steal, or they've got an effective right to do it because there's no remedy for consumers against the wrong that's committed against them. So that's the problem. And it's a problem we have both because of this clever lawyering by some corporate lawyers, but it's also because that clever lawyering has been ratified by the U.S. Supreme Court that has held that an old-standing federal law intended to facilitate the use of arbitration among commercial parties evinces, 100 years later almost, an unbelievably strong federal interest in promoting arbitration in contexts where it was never imagined in the first place, involving large corporations and individuals, even in small dollar disputes. And so in a series of Supreme Court decisions, the most notable of which is AT&T versus Concepcion, the court has held that states really can't protect consumers against these kind of forced arbitration provisions, including that they can't find them unconscionable, that the federal interest in promoting arbitration overrides even the state doctrine and the state jurisprudence of unconscionability. So consumers are stuck. They're stuck, that is, unless there's a federal solution. So the best solution for this would be a solution that would apply across the board to all industries, to all goods, to all services, to employment contracts as well. And that would say there's no, in these kind of contracts, corporations can't impose these forced arbitration provisions on consumers or employees. We have legislation to do that. The Arbitration Fairness Act, which would protect consumers, protect employees in exactly this way. We haven't yet won that. The time, I think, is not too far away where we're going to win. We did win, though, in the Dodd-Frank legislation, provisions related to consumer financial contracts, as well as securities contracts, as well as mortgages. And the Dodd-Frank law did away with forced arbitration provisions in mortgage contracts. And it importantly gave the newly created Consumer Financial Protection Bureau the authority to eliminate these provisions in consumer financial contracts. The law said that first, CFP would have to conduct a study on forced arbitration, its use and impact in the consumer financial context. And the agency spent many years doing that, finally issued its final study earlier this week, and it's an incredibly detailed study. It's unbelievably comprehensive. It is overwhelming in making the case that there is no way that these kind of provisions are compatible with any respect for decent consumer rights. So we now have the predicate for the agency to move forward and out and out prohibit these provisions in consumer financial contracts. It would be an amazing step forward for consumer rights. We're going to hear more in detail about what the study said momentarily. But I think the key thing is the agency is, I think, on track to do the right thing. It's going to face enormous pressure from the banking industry, from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, from other industry interests, and it's going to be really important for the consumer community to join together to push the agency to do what's right and to support them as they do what is right, and also for members of Congress to give them the backing too, to know that if they take on really powerful interests on something that is of central importance to a really powerful industry, that they have backing from supporters in Congress. This is going to be a high-profile issue over the next several months and probably over the next couple of years, just at the CFPB, not even mentioning the rest of the forced arbitration context. And it's something we need you all really to join in on and carry forward. We're on the precipice of an extremely important win for consumers, but we've got to carry it forward, back up the agency that's ready to do the right thing. Thanks.